So, you sent us some really interesting things this week about like how to deal with cockroach problems naturally. And it's something I think a lot of us probably think about or have to deal with at some point in our homes. So we've taken your articles and your notes, and we're going to unpack some of these ways you can try and deal with these persistent pests,
Yeah.
without having to go straight for the really harsh chemicals.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, you were looking for like a guide to understanding these natural methods and how effective they really are, and like when you might actually need to think about getting some help with it,
Yeah.
bringing in a pro. So I think we should just dive into those natural options that seem to be the most effective from your sources.
Okay, cool. And I'm Mark Buzz, your guide through all this.
And I'm Anna Bugs, just here to connect the dots. And hey, if you find this deep dive into natural pest control helpful for you, we'd love a follow and a like.
Absolutely. And for more helpful tips and insights on keeping your home pest-free, be sure to check out Simple Pest Management on social media. Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the methods that came up a lot in what you sent was diatomaceous earth. Now, for someone who might be considering that, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, diatomaceous earth, or DE as people often call it, is definitely popular. And as your sources said, one of the most effective natural methods out there, for you to consider. It's basically a fine powder. But what's really interesting, I think, is how it works. On this tiny level, the powder is actually quite abrasive. So when a cockroach walks through it, these tiny particles damage that waxy outer layer that they have. It's called the exoskeleton, that hard shell that all insects have.
Okay, so it's not like a poison. It's more like a physical thing that harms them.
Precisely. So the outer waxy layer, the exoskeleton, is
Yeah.
really important for the cockroach to hold in moisture. So once that's damaged, they basically start to lose water and they dehydrate and then they die. So it's a physical mechanism, which is why it's seen as a natural option.
That makes sense. So if you were going to use this, how do you actually do it? Just kind of sprinkle it around?
Yeah, I mean, that's the general idea. You would sprinkle a thin layer, of food-grade diatomaceous earth around areas where you've seen cockroaches or places where you think they might be traveling, so like along baseboards or in any cracks and crevices you might have in your home. Or even, those dark spots cockroaches love to hide. But the thing is, you have to remember it works through direct contact. So if a roach doesn't walk through it, it's not going to be effective for that roach. And because of this contact, you have to reapply it fairly often, especially if it gets wet or disturbed.
Okay, so it's like creating these little zones they have to cross. Now, your sources also mentioned boric acid and borax as being like common remedies for this. Are these similar to DE and how they work?
Right. They are common remedies that you might have heard of, but how they actually work is a bit different. When a cockroach walks through either boric acid or borax powder, just like with DE, the tiny particles cling to their body. But the thing is, for it to really work, the roach actually has to eat it. So when they clean themselves, which they do pretty often, they end up swallowing that boric acid or borax.
Okay, and what happens inside them?
So once it's inside them, it messes with their digestive system. And that disruption is what leads to them dying. So contact is still important, for it to get on the roach in the first place. But the real damage comes after they've cleaned themselves and swallowed it.
Interesting. So it's a bit of a 1-2 punch then. Now, one of your sources mentioned mixing boric acid with sugar. What's the thinking behind that?
Yeah, that's kind of a classic DIY bait. And what happens is the sugar attracts the cockroaches. It's like a treat for them. So you mix equal parts boric acid and sugar, and it's kind of a tempting treat that also happens to be their downfall. And then you'd sprinkle that mixture around places like countertops, baseboards again, any areas where you've noticed the roaches. So the sugar basically brings them to the boric acid.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, another kitchen staple that came up in your notes was baking soda. Can that also be used to get rid of roaches?
It can. Yeah, baking soda is another natural method that some people report can kill cockroaches. And it was in your research. And the way it supposedly works is similar to the boric acid. It has to be eaten. So when roaches eat a mix of baking soda and sugar, something happens in their stomach. And it makes them swell up and die.
So again, the sugar is the bait to get them to eat the baking soda.
Yeah, exactly. And it's often seen as a gentler alternative, to some of those strong chemical repellents you might find in the store. To use it, you would just put little bowls of this baking soda and sugar mix in places where you've seen roaches, and then you just see how well it works for you.
Okay, so we've talked about some powders and things from the kitchen. What about smells? I know a lot of people use essential oils. Can they help with roaches?
Yeah, essential oils can definitely help. They're usually more like repellents and things that will actually kill them. But peppermint oil is one that's often mentioned, and people think it messes with the roaches' nervous systems. Neem oil is another one that came up, and people think it stops them from being able to reproduce, which would help over time, of course.
Interesting. So not going to eliminate an infestation
Yeah,
overnight, but more of a stay away kind of thing?
exactly. And to use them, you would mix a few drops of the oil with water in a spray bottle, and then you can spray that around places where they might get in, countertops, areas where you've seen them. And the scent basically tells them to go away.
Okay. Another thing I've heard people say is using coffee grounds to trap them. What's the deal with that?
That's an interesting one, and it did come up in your research. The idea is that the strong smell of coffee grounds will attract roaches, and you can lure them into a jar or something with water in it, and they fall in and drown.
That sounds plausible. I mean, the strong smell drawing them in.
Well, one of your sources actually mentioned a study, and it turns out the reality might be a little different. This study said that some things in coffee grounds might actually repel roaches, though it wasn't a super strong effect. So it might seem like a good idea, to try it. But whether it really works as a trap isn't totally clear.
That's kind of surprising. I always thought the smellier, the better to attract them. So maybe not the most reliable way to go. What about bay leaves? I remember my grandma always used to have those around.
Bay leaves are definitely a well-known natural repellent for cockroaches, and they were in the information you sent us. The strong smell is basically what roaches don't like, so it's a solution that's not poisonous. And, a lot of people use it to try and keep roaches away. One of your sources even mentioned a study that said they might repel roaches, though it was kind of an old study.
So it's all about the smell then.
Pretty much. To use them, you crush up a handful of bay leaves, and then you scatter them around food sources in your house. Behind appliances, in cabinets, any place they might like to hide.
Okay, so another scent-based deterrent. We're building quite the collection here. Now let's talk about something a bit brighter. Lemon juice. Can that really help with roaches?
It can. Yeah, lemon juice is another natural repellent, and it has the bonus of making your home smell nice. That citrusy scent actually has something called limon in it, and studies have shown that it can repel a few different kinds of cockroaches, like German cockroaches, American cockroaches, and smoky brown cockroaches.
So it's more than just a nice smell. It's like a keep-out sign for them.
Right. To use it, you mix lemon juice with water and then wipe down your countertops with it, floors, baseboards. And the other thing is, cleaning regularly like that, it gets rid of food residue, which is what attracts roaches in the first place. So it's like a double whammy, the smell and getting rid of the food.
Make sense? So far, we've talked about stuff you can sprinkle or spray, but what about stopping them from getting inside your home in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really important thing to think about. Preventing them from getting in is one of the best ways to control them. Roaches can squeeze through tiny little openings, so you really need to seal things up.
Where should people be looking to seal things up?
So you want to focus on any cracks or crevices you see in your house. Like little gaps around windows and doors, and especially around pipes, where they go into walls or cabinets. Using caulk to seal those gaps makes it way harder for roaches to get in and find a place to live. So it's all about not letting them in at all, which stops the problem before it even starts.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Cutting off the supply line. So we've covered a lot of DIY things you can try. But what if you've tried those and it's not working? Or the problem just seems too big to handle? When is it time to call in the pros? Like maybe Simple Pest Management.
Right. That's a great question. So all these natural things we've talked about can definitely be helpful for smaller problems or to prevent things from getting bad. But when you have a really bad infestation, you really do need a professional. A few signs that it's time to call for help would be if you see roaches a lot, even during the day, or if you find those little egg cases around your house, or if you notice a kind of musty smell, which can be a sign of a big infestation that you're not going to be able to deal with yourself.
So not just seeing a roach run by once in a while.
Exactly.
All right.
If you see them a lot, it means there are probably a lot of them living in your home already. So at Simple Pest Management, our cockroach control services are designed to deal with those really bad problems. We start with inspections, looking at your property carefully to see how bad it is and where the roaches are hiding, how they're getting in.
And then what's the next step?
Well, we use treatments that are safe and effective. And we tailor those treatments to the specific kind of cockroach you have. Like German cockroaches, for example, are really common. And they can be really hard to get rid of on your own. And on top of just getting rid of the roaches you already have, We also focus on preventing them from coming back. So sealing those cracks and crevices we talked about, giving you advice on how to keep your house clean so it doesn't attract roaches. And we also have maintenance plans to keep the roaches away in the long run.
Wow, that sounds really thorough. So if someone is just at their wits' end with these roaches, what's the best way for them to get in touch with Simple Pest Management?
So if you've tried everything yourself and it's not working, give us a call. We have a few offices in Santee, Sacramento, Citrus Heights, and Benicia. You can reach our Santee and Citrus Heights offices at 619-373-7378. Our Sacramento office is 916-909-7378, and our Benicia office is 833-887-7387. And we're open Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. And Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. We're always ready to help new customers.
Great. Well, that's a lot of really good info, from things you can try at home to knowing when you need the experts like at Simple Pest Management.
Right. The main thing is there are definitely natural options you can use to control cockroaches in your home, whether you want to kill them or just keep them away.
And it's important to remember those natural methods are a good first step, especially for smaller problems.
Yeah.
But if you've got a really bad infestation, it's definitely time to call in the professionals.
Nope.
Well, this has been a really fascinating dive into the world of natural cockroach control, based on the stuff you sent us. But considering how resourceful these roaches are and all the natural ways to deal with them we've talked about, what do you think this tells us about how we try to manage the natural world, right inside our own homes? It's something to think about, isn't it? Thanks for joining us today on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.